The pituitary gland is part of the endocrine system and is relatively the size of a pea. It is resting upon the hypophyseal fossa, positioned inferiorly to the hypothalamus, posterior to the nasal ridge, and is embedded within the sella turcica. The pituitary gland is called the master gland as it produces multiple hormones. It is composed of three distinct parts: the anterior adenohypophysis, intermediate and posterior neurohypophysis pituitary lobes. The development of the anterior pituitary happens simultaneously with that of the posterior pituitary. The two tissues, anterior and posterior, fuse together, becoming tightly opposed. Their structures remain distinctly different, representing the tissues they originate from. The anterior pituitary consists of gland cells and is connected to the brain via blood vessels. It regulates the physiological response of stress, reproduction, and lactation in the body via hormones. The hypothalamus controls the secretion of anterior pituitary hormones such as growth hormone, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. During embryological development, the anterior pituitary is derived from the ectoderm cell layer of the trilaminar disc, developing from the buccopharyngeal membrane. The development of the telencephalon of the brain and the sphenoid bone during embryological development causes the head to tilt forward. This results in the buccopharyngeal membrane folding, creating an invagination called the Rathke's pouch. The epithelial cells surrounding the pouch begin to proliferate and the structure grows superiorly through the sphenoid bone and into the sella turcica, meeting with the posterior pituitary gland. The remaining Rathke's pouch then fuses with the infundibulum of the pituitary gland and forms the pars intermedia connecting the two lobes. The posterior pituitary comprises of nervous tissue and secretes and stores pituitary hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin. During embryological development, the posterior pituitary develops from the infundibulum, a downward growth of neural ectoderm from the inferior diencephalon. From the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus, the posterior pituitary will contain the terminal axonal projections of magnocellular neurons with pituocytes surrounding the projections. In order for the correct development to occur, the posterior pituitary requires neuronal POU domain factor BRUN2. Posterior pituitary gland development correlates with its function. The hormones mentioned above, oxytocin and vasopressin, are produced by the magnocellular neurons of the posterior pituitary that are released directly from the axonal endings of their neurons into the vascular circulation. While the formation of both the anterior and posterior portions of the pituitary gland are usually efficient, there is always the chance of anomalies occurring during embryological development. Dr. White, a specialist in endocrinology, will now investigate.
The Rathke's pouch gives rise to the anterior pituitary gland. Following its formation, leftover cells from the Rathke's pouch can form benign tumours called craniopharyngiomas, as seen here. Although these tumours are benign, they can cause issues in children aged 5 to 10 and some adults. Some of the symptoms that can persist include decreased functionality of both lobes of the pituitary, including lower levels of hormone production and hormonal imbalances, an increase of intracranial pressure, potential damage to surrounding neural tissues, and learning and behavioural disabilities.
The embryological development of the anterior and posterior pituitary glands correlates with their individual functions. The anterior pituitary requires hormonal control via the hypothalamus, whereas the posterior pituitary requires neurological control.